What's up, everyone? Today we are going on the most insane journey through history you have ever seen. We are going to explore every single American tank ever made, starting from the very beginning. I'm talking all the way back in 1917, when the first American tank rolled off the line. And we're not stopping until we get to the futuristic tanks of 2025. This is over 100 years of pure American firepower. And trust me, you won't believe how much these things have changed. This is going to be the craziest history lesson of your life. We are going to break down over a century of incredible engineering, epic battles, and insane technology. I've spent a ridiculous amount of time putting this all together, so you don't have to. We're going to make this super simple and super exciting. By the end of this video, you will know everything there is to know about American tanks, from the clunky metal boxes of World War I to the unstoppable beasts of today. So, get ready, because we are about to witness the complete evolution of American armor. We're talking about the tanks that changed the world, the ones that dominated battlefields, and the ones that are literally from the future. It's going to be an epic ride, so buckle up, don't blink, because we are starting right now. This is the full history of American tanks, and it's going to blow your mind. Alright, let's rewind the clock all the way back to World War I. The year is 1917. The battlefield is a nightmare of trenches and machine guns. The British and French had already figured out that these huge rolling metal monsters called tanks could break the stalemate. America, just entering the war, was like, we need some of those, like, yesterday. But there was a huge problem. We had zero experience building tanks. Absolutely none. It was a brand new concept. So, what did we do? We did what anyone would do when they're behind. We looked at what the experts were doing. And the expert was France, with their revolutionary Renault FT tank. This thing was a game changer. It was small. It had a turret that could spin a full 360 degrees, and it only needed a crew of 2. It was the blueprint for basically every modern tank that followed. The American expeditionary forces in Europe got their hands on some and immediately saw their potential. Back in the States, the order was given, copy that French tank, but make it American. And that's exactly what we did. The result was the M1917 light tank. It was, for all intents and purposes, a near-perfect clone of the Renault FT. We just swapped out the French engine for an American one and made a few other tiny tweaks. It was our first ever mass-produced tank, a literal copy-paste job, to get us into the tank game. We cranked out almost 1,000 of these M1917s, which is an insane number for a country that had never built a tank before. But here's the crazy part. By the time these tanks were built, shipped over to Europe, and ready for a fight, the war was over. That's right. America's first tank, the one we rushed to build for the Great War, never fired a single shot in combat during that war. It was a classic case of being a little too late to the party. Despite not seeing action in World War I, the M1917 was incredibly important. It was America's training wheels. It taught an entire generation of engineers and soldiers the basics of tank design, maintenance, and tactics. It was the humble, clunky, little French-inspired box that kicked off America's century-long obsession with building the biggest and baddest tanks on the planet. This was ground zero for everything that came next. Okay, now let's jump forward to the start of World War II. Europe is on fire, and America realizes its tank game is seriously weak. The little tanks from World War I just weren't going to cut it against the German panzers. We needed something bigger, something with more firepower, and we needed it fast. The problem was, we hadn't figured out how to make a turret big enough to hold a powerful 75mm cannon yet. The engineering just wasn't there. So, American designers came up with one of the weirdest, most unique tank designs of the entire war, the M3 medium tank. Since they couldn't put the big gun in a turret, they did something crazy. They stuck it in the side of the hull, in a fixed position, with limited traverse. This meant the entire tank had to turn to aim the main weapon. It was a massive disadvantage, but it was the only way to get that big gun on a tank quickly. But wait, it gets even weirder. They knew a tank needed a turret, so they slapped a smaller turret on top and put a little 37mm cannon in it. So you have this tall, lopsided tank with 2 main guns, one for busting bunkers, and one for fighting other tanks. And to operate this beast, you needed a massive crew of 7 guys. It was crowded, it was complicated, and it was a designer's nightmare, but it was armed to the teeth. When this tank was sent to the British fighting in North Africa, they made their own modifications and called it the Grant. The American version was known as the Lee. They were basically the same tank, just with slightly different turrets. In the early days of the Desert War, the M3 was actually a lifesaver. It was one of the only Allied tanks that could go toe-to-toe with the German Panzer IIIs and IVs. Its 75mm gun was a monster, but the M3 was always meant to be a temporary fix, a stopgap. Its high profile made it an easy target, and the side-mounted gun was a huge tactical problem. As soon as a better design was ready, the M3 was phased out of frontline service. Still, for a brief, critical moment in the war, this strange, seven-man, two-gunned beast held the line and gave the Allies the firepower they desperately needed. It was the awkward but essential stepping stone to America's most famous tank. If you ask anyone to name one American tank from World War II, this is the one they'll say, the M4 Sherman. This tank wasn't just a weapon, it was an absolute legend. It is the icon of American military power in the 20th century. After the awkward M3, Lee, American engineers finally cracked the code. They figured out how to put that powerful 75mm gun into a fully rotating turret, creating a perfectly balanced, reliable, and effective medium tank. The genius of the Sherman wasn't that it was the strongest or the most powerful tank on the battlefield, because it often wasn't. German tanks like the Tiger and the Panther were technically superior, with thicker armor and more powerful guns. But the Sherman had a secret weapon that no German tank could ever match mass production. America's industrial might went into overdrive, and we built nearly 50,000 of these things. That is an absolutely mind-boggling number. Think about it like this. For every one German Tiger tank the Allies faced, we could throw 5, 10, or even 15 Shermans at it. The strategy was literally to overwhelm the enemy with sheer numbers. Shermans were everywhere. They were used by the US Army, the Marines, the British, the Free French, the Poles, and even the Soviet Union through the Lend-Lease program. This tank was the workhorse of the entire Allied war effort, fighting in every single theater of the war. And the Sherman was incredibly versatile. It was constantly being upgraded. There were versions with bigger guns, like the 76mm cannon, and the Easy 8 version, with improved suspension. There were Shermans modified to be flamethrowers, Shermans that could clear minefields with giant flails, and even Shermans that could swim. The duplex drive, or DD Shermans, had a giant inflatable screen that allowed them to launch from ships offshore and motor their way to the beach, which was critical on D-Day. The Sherman defined the American way of war, not always the most sophisticated, but reliable, adaptable, and produced in such overwhelming numbers that victory was inevitable. It carried the Allies from the beaches of Normandy all the way to Berlin. It wasn't perfect, and crews had a love-hate relationship with it, but without the M4 Sherman, the outcome of World War II could have been very, very different. It's an absolute icon for a reason. While the Sherman was the main workhorse, the US Army also needed a good light tank. The old M5 Stuart was getting seriously outdated by the middle of the war. It was fast, but its gun was basically useless against any real German armor. So, the army needed a replacement. A new light tank that was still fast and nimble for scouting, but packed enough punch to defend itself. The answer was the M24 Chaffee. The Chaffee was a massive upgrade. It looked like a miniature heavy tank. It had sloped armor for better protection, and most importantly, it carried a lightweight 75mm gun. This was basically the same gun as the original Sherman, but put into a much smaller, faster package. For a light tank, this was a huge amount of firepower. It meant that a Chaffee on a scouting mission could actually take on enemy infantry, anti-tank guns, and even some medium tanks if it got the drop on them. Designers also gave the Chaffee a brand new suspension system, using torsion bars instead of the old clunky bogies. This gave it a much smoother ride, making it faster and more stable when firing on the move. It was a zippy, agile, and surprisingly powerful little tank. The crews who got them absolutely loved them. It was a massive improvement over the old Stuart in every single way. The Chaffee was the future of light tank design. But here's the catch, and it's a recurring theme for some American tanks. It arrived late. Production on the M24 didn't ramp up until the very end of 1944. While some Chafees did see action in the final months of the war in Europe, including the Battle of the Bulge, they didn't arrive in the huge numbers needed to make a massive impact. Most tank crews finished the war still using their old Shermans and Stuarts. The Chaffee's real moment to shine came a few years later in the Korean War. It was one of the first American tanks available to fight the North Korean invasion. Although it struggled against the heavier Soviet-made T-34-85 tanks, the Chaffee's speed and agility made it perfect for the rough, mountainous terrain of Korea. It proved its worth as a reliable reconnaissance vehicle, even if it was a little late to the big show in World War II. Throughout most of World War II, American tank crews lived in fear of one thing: the German heavy tanks. The Tiger and the Panther were monsters. They could destroy a Sherman from a mile away, while the Sherman's gun would just bounce harmlessly off their thick frontal armor. For years, the U.S. Army argued about whether they even needed a heavy tank to fight them. Some generals said it wasn't necessary, but the soldiers on the front lines were screaming for a fair fight. Finally, near the very end of the war, they got their wish: the M26 Pershing. This wasn't a medium tank. This was America's first operational heavy tank, designed with one purpose in mind: to hunt and kill German Panthers and Tigers. The Pershing was a complete departure from previous American designs. It was lower, wider, and had incredibly thick, well-sloped armor that offered a massive leap in protection. The biggest deal was its gun. The Pershing carried a high-velocity 90mm cannon. This was a beast of a weapon, derived from an anti-aircraft gun. It could punch right through the frontal armor of a Panther, and could even take on the mighty Tiger. For the first time, American tankers had a machine that could go toe-to-toe with the best Germany had, and win. When the Pershing showed up, the balance of power on the battlefield started to shift. A small, special shipment of Pershings was rushed to the European front in early 1945. They were given to experienced crews who immediately put them to the test. There are famous accounts of Pershing single-handedly taking out multiple German tanks. One legendary duel in the city of Cologne saw a Pershing knock out a Panther with 3 shots, an event that was caught on film and became iconic. The tank was an absolute game-changer. But just like the Chaffee, the Pershing was another case of too little, too late. Only a handful saw combat in World War II. Its true test would come 5 years later in Korea, where it was reclassified as a medium tank and became the primary opponent to the Soviet T-34-85. The Pershing proved to be more than a match for them, cementing its place as one of America's most powerful and important tank designs, even if it just missed its intended fight. After the Korean War, the M24 Chaffee was showing its age. The world was entering the Cold War, and the US needed a new light tank for reconnaissance missions. It had to be fast, air-transportable, and have enough firepower to handle the new generation of Soviet-made armor it might encounter. The answer was the M41 Walker Bulldog, a tank that was fast, furious, and a little bit controversial. The tank was named after General Walton Walker, who was killed in a Jeep accident during the Korean War. His nickname was Bulldog, so the tank became the Walker Bulldog. Its design philosophy was all about speed and firepower. It was equipped with a new, powerful 76mm gun that had significantly better performance than the Chaffee's old cannon. This gun could theoretically take on the Soviet T-54 main battle tank, which was a huge capability for a light tank. The M41 was incredibly fast for its time, capable of hitting speeds over 45 miles per hour. It was designed to be the Army's eyes and ears, racing ahead of the main force, scouting enemy positions, and engaging targets of opportunity. It was also designed to be light enough to be airlifted by cargo planes, giving the Army the ability to rapidly deploy armored forces anywhere in the world. On paper, it was the perfect Cold War scout. However, the Walker Bulldog had some serious problems. Early production models were plagued with issues. The cabin was extremely cramped for the 4-man crew, the engine was noisy and guzzled fuel, and the tank was considered overweight for a light tank, which limited its air transportability. It was also a pretty big target for a scout vehicle. The crews weren't huge fans of it initially, and it earned a reputation for being a bit of a handful. Despite its flaws, the M41 was produced in large numbers and became the standard light tank for the US Army for over a decade. While it didn't see much combat with American forces, it was exported to dozens of countries all over the world. Many of these nations, like South Vietnam, Taiwan, and Brazil, used the Walker Bulldog extensively in their own conflicts. It was a flawed but important step in the evolution of the modern air-mobile light tank. With the Cold War heating up, the M26 Pershing and its derivatives were no longer enough to counter the massive number of Soviet tanks being produced. America needed a new main battle tank, a true successor to the Sherman. This led to the creation of one of the most successful and widely used tank families in history, the Patton series, starting with the M48 Patton. This tank would become the face of the U.S. Army for decades. The M48 Patton was a complete redesign. It featured a sleek, cast steel hull and a new one-piece cast turret that was curved and rounded, a shape that was excellent at deflecting incoming shells. It was a huge improvement in armor protection over the World War II-era tanks. It was also the first American tank to eliminate the hull machine gunner position, reducing the crew to 4 and making the design more efficient. Initially armed with the same 90mm gun as the later Pershings, the M48 was designed to be the ultimate tank killer. It had a new and improved fire control system, including a stereoscopic rangefinder that made it much more accurate than its predecessors. The commander was also given a new cupola with a 50 caliber machine gun he could fire from inside the tank, a feature that would become standard on American tanks for years. The M48 Patton was the workhorse of the American military during the height of the Cold War. Thousands were built and stationed all across Europe, ready to face down a potential Soviet invasion, but its biggest combat test came in the jungles of Vietnam. Although there weren't many large-scale tank battles, the M48 proved invaluable for infantry support, busting bunkers, and clearing jungle with its powerful main gun. It was a reliable and feared presence on the battlefield. Like the Sherman before it, the M48 was exported all over the world to America's allies. Israel, in particular, used the M48 to great effect in its wars, heavily modifying and upgrading them over the years. The M48 Patton was a symbol of American influence during the Cold War, a tough, reliable, and powerful tank that served as the backbone of the Armored Corps for decades and set the stage for its even more famous successor. The M48 Patton was great, but, the arms race with the Soviet Union never really stopped. As soon as the Soviets rolled out the T-62 tank with its powerful 115mm smoothbore gun, the M48's 90mm cannon was suddenly outclassed. The U.S. Army needed an answer, and honestly, it came in the form of an upgrade, not a completely new tank. This was the M60 Patton, a tank that looked pretty similar to its predecessor, but was actually a massive leap forward in firepower. The single biggest upgrade for the M60 was its new gun, the legendary British-designed Royal Ordnance L7, which the US produced as the M68. This was a 105mm cannon, and it was absolutely phenomenal. It was incredibly accurate and powerful, and it could defeat the armor of any Soviet tank of its era. This gun actually became the standard cannon for NATO tanks for the next 20 years. It gave the M60 the punch it needed to stay on top. The M60 also ditched the gasoline engine of the M48 for a new, more efficient, and way less flammable diesel engine. This gave it a much greater operational range, and that's a huge deal in a tank war. The armor was also improved, with a thicker, redesigned frontal hull. The first version still had the rounded turret of the M48, but later versions like the M60A1 introduced a new, more sharply angled turret with even better protection. This needle-nose look is the classic M60 silhouette. The M60 family had a ridiculously long service life. It was the main battle tank of the U.S. Army all the way through the 1960s, 70s, and into the 80s. It even served with the Marine Corps in the Gulf War in 1991, fighting right alongside its much more modern replacement. There were tons of variants: the M60A2 Starship with a bizarre gun launcher that fired missiles, and the M60A3, which added a thermal sight and a laser rangefinder, keeping the old tank competitive well into the modern era. The M60 is the definition of longevity. It was a Cold War warrior that just kept getting upgraded and refused to be retired. Even today, hundreds of heavily modified M60s are still in service with armies around the world. It really represents the peak of that classic tank design philosophy before the age of composite armor and computers took over. It was the last of the classic patterns and the bridge to the super tank that would come next. By the late 1970s, the game changed forever. The M60 was a great tank, but, intelligence reports on new Soviet tanks like the T-64 and T-72 were honestly terrifying. They had new composite armor and massive 125mm guns. The US realized that simply upgrading old designs just wasn't going to be enough. They needed a revolution. They needed a tank so advanced it would be untouchable. And what they built was the M1 Abrams. The Abrams was a complete rethinking of what a tank could be. The biggest innovation was its armor. It was the first American tank to use British-developed Chobham armor, a top-secret composite blend of steel, ceramics, and other materials. This armor was practically immune to the anti-tank weapons of the day. It was so effective that it completely shocked the world. The Abrams was built for one thing: survival. Then there's the engine. Instead of a normal diesel engine, the Abrams was given a 1,500 horsepower gas turbine engine, kind of like the kind you find in a helicopter. This gave it unbelievable speed and acceleration for a 60-ton vehicle. The sound of an Abrams moving at full speed is a terrifying, high-pitched whine, totally different from any other tank. It's shockingly fast and quiet when it's not moving, which is a huge tactical advantage, and the firepower is just insane. The first M1s used the same 105mm gun as the M60, but they were quickly upgraded to the M1A1 model, which carried a German-designed 120mm smoothbore cannon. Combined with a revolutionary thermal sight and a digital fire control computer, an Abrams crew could accurately hit targets over 2 miles away, day or night, in any weather while driving at full speed. It was like science fiction come to life. The Abrams proved its dominance in the Gulf War. In the largest tank battles since World War II, the M1 Abrams completely annihilated the Iraqis' Soviet-made T-72s. The kill ratio was astronomical. Abrams tanks were destroying enemy tanks from miles away, often before the Iraqis even knew they were there. Very few Abrams were lost to enemy fire. It was the most lopsided victory in the history of armored warfare, and cemented the M1 Abrams as the undisputed king of the battlefield, a title it still holds today through constant upgrades. The M1 Abrams has been the king for over 40 years, but, the future of warfare is changing. Drones, advanced anti-tank missiles, and cyber warfare mean that the next generation of American tanks has to be smarter, lighter, and maybe even unmanned. We're now in a race to build the tank of 2025 and beyond, and the concepts are straight out of a video game. This is where things get really crazy. For years, the Army's biggest future tank project was called the Future Combat Systems, which included a vehicle called the XM-1202 Mounted Combat System. This was supposed to be a lightweight, air-deployable tank armed with a massive 120mm cannon, but it was designed to be part of a network. It would share data with drones, infantry, and other vehicles in real time. The whole project was incredibly ambitious and complex, and it was ultimately cancelled because it was just too expensive. But the ideas didn't die. Today, the focus is on the Optionally Manned Tank, or OMT. This is the concept for the Abrams replacement. Imagine a tank that can be controlled by a crew of 2 people, or even no people. A tank that can be operated remotely from a safe location miles away. This would use AI to help with targeting, driving, and even protecting itself with active protection systems that shoot down incoming missiles. We're also seeing the rise of robotic wingmen for tanks. Think of smaller, unmanned robotic tanks like the Ripsaw M5, driving alongside a main battle tank. These smaller robots can scout ahead, draw enemy fire, breach obstacles, or provide extra firepower, all while keeping the human crew of the main tank out of harm's way. This human-machine teaming is the absolute future of armored warfare. So, while the next officially named American main battle tank hasn't been revealed yet, the path is clear. By 2025 and beyond, we're looking at a force of lighter, smarter, networked, and potentially robotic tanks. The era of just having the thickest armor and biggest gun is evolving. The future is about information, automation, and survivability in a world where threats can come from anywhere. The evolution that started with that little M1917 is now leading us to an army of robot tanks. It's an insane transformation. And that is it. From a tiny French copy in 1917 to the robotic beasts of the future, you have just witnessed the entire insane history of every American tank. We saw how a simple metal box evolved into the M4 Sherman that helped win World War II, then into the Cold War dominating Patton series, and finally into the legendary M1 Abrams, the most powerful tank the world has ever seen. The amount of technology and power packed into these machines is just mind-blowing. This journey has been absolutely epic. It's a story of over 100 years of American ingenuity, power, and the constant drive to build a better, stronger, and more dominant fighting machine. Each tank we looked at was a response to a new threat, a new technology, or a new way of fighting. It's an incredible story of evolution, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did putting it all together for you. It was a massive project, but totally worth it. Now I want to hear from you. After seeing all of them, from the M19-17 to the M1 Abrams, which one is your favorite? Was it the iconic Sherman, the weird M3 Lee, or the futuristic robot tanks? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more insane history videos like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.